What are you thankful for in day 12 of 30 days of thanks? And what do you do when you're taunted and threatened by people who hate you? He stared with a glare at me for 6 hours non-stop. His body was like a stone placed upon that bar stool, his feet glued to the floor. He stared at me with eyes darting out from his cold brown eyes, and he was motionless and never blinked. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sat there staring at that letter on my bed. It was addressed from President Nixon ordering me into the United States Armed Forces. I had to report in another 3 weeks. Yes, it was the 3rd week in July in 1972 when I got that letter, and just a few weeks before, I had come that close to having a head-on collision with a car coming at me at 65 miles an hour, with me going 65 miles an hour in the other direction. It was such a shocking experience that I still hadn't completely recovered from the moment that I looked at Linda with her eyes like a ghost, in shock. It was an amazing experience and one that I told in a story before. But this was different. Now I had to report to the United States Armed Forces, and I was in the Army. I was now finishing my 2nd bottle of wine. In a few hours, I would have to leave with my father to go down to the East Colonial Drive parking lot and get on the bus and head to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, with other GIs that were loading up. I had not volunteered. Just a few years before that, while I was still in college, on December 1st, 1969, I drew a number 69 in the lottery. And that meant that I had a deferment until I got out of college. I didn't think the Vietnam War was still going to be going on at that time, but it was. In the year that they drafted me with my number 69, they drew up to 72 and never drafted another person again to this day when I'm recording. It was a changing point in my life, and I remember going down to Colonial Drive, my dad saying goodbye to me, and we drove and took off, and some hours later we got through the states of Florida, Georgia, and arrived in Columbia, South Carolina at Fort Jackson. And there was the old buzzard himself in the statue, standing in front of the fort like he had been there for 200 years. I had actually been in ROTC just a few years before that at the University of Florida. I had wanted to be an Air Force pilot, and I was really excited about that. I wanted to fly, and I wanted to fly fast. To me, it was exciting as an athlete. But then they found out I was colorblind and told me I couldn't fly. I was disappointed, but quickly switched into Army ROTC and became a Sabre Guard and marched in the King Rex Parade, into New Orleans Mardi Gras, and several other parades. And a few months later, Kent State had a terrible accident, and several students were shot to death in Kent State, in Ohio. And it changed my view of what living in the United States was really all about. And I became convinced that we were a money-driven nation, and it was really money that came first and lives second, oftentimes. That was the view I took, and it was the view that many people took. It may not be true, but I still hold true to that today. The Kent State incident made me aware that there were two sides to every story. And although it was true that the world was being threatened by communism and that there was a struggle going on in Vietnam because of that problem, that there was also a lot of money being made off that Vietnam War, and it was starting to look really, really suspicious to me and to a lot of people my age that I wanted to pursue a world of peace, and that I would become a peace warrior and willing to take a look at humanity as a whole. And I became attracted to people who were peace seekers. Whether we were right or wrong didn't seem so much the point as the fact that John Lennon seemed to be right, that couldn't we at least give peace a chance? So I took up that mantra and I lived it and I moved in that direction. It became a wonderful feeling for me. But here I was now in the United States Army arriving at Fort Jackson, and my thoughts were, well, it got you out of your accounting job, you didn't like it anyway, and you may as well be the best soldier you can be if you're going to be here. However, I did make a decision that I would never take up arms to shoot another man. And so I knew when that moment came to make that decision that I would have to face it and probably face even possibly some brig time, that is fancy name for jail in the Army. And I thought, well, I would rather spend my time behind bars than actually kill another human being. So that's the stance I took, and that was the risk and the penalty I was willing to pay if that's what it came to be. Well, after getting all of our shots and getting our clothes, our uniforms, our boots, everything, I was starting to enjoy meeting some of the guys. So we were starting to get along pretty good, and now testing was going to take place. And we all went into this big testing room. And there was the first battery of tests, and I noticed after the first battery of tests, they let half the group go. And then the other half of us were still taking tests. I thought, well, this is really interesting. So the second round and battery of tests came, and we took time, and I finished it. And then I noticed that another half had left, and so 1/4 of the original class was still there taking tests. Well, this went on all day. At the end of the day, I was in the room with just 7 people taking another battery of tests, and then I was told I could go home, go to the barracks. I had been an athlete at the University of Florida, a good weightlifter, held national records, and was very happy that my body was developing the way it had, and I was feeling really good about the fact that I had zest and was able to calculate things fairly quickly. And they recognized it also in my platoon, and they made me the platoon leader, that is the acting sergeant. They picked one boy out of the group of 40, and they put him in charge of the rest of the 40 men. And you have 4 squads or 5 squads. We had 4. And your job, of course, is to march beside your men to make sure that everything's okay and talk to the squad leaders and keep everything happening. And I did really well in that position. We had physical fitness tests, and I'd always come out on top with another fellow that was in there. His name was Benjamin. And ironically, he was actually a conscientious objector, and they let him out of the Army shortly thereafter. But an interesting thing happened, and things like this would happen from time to time. There were certain drill sergeants, including our major drill sergeant in our platoon, that was very cruel. For some reason, some of these leaders enjoyed the cruelty. I remember going to church one Sunday, and the chaplain saying, if you're lucky, you're going to get a chance to go to Vietnam. And I'm thinking, if I'm lucky, I'm going to get a chance to go to Vietnam and kill people. And there was all these films being showed at the church service of all these people being blown up and Charlie being shot. They called the enemy Charlie. I'm thinking, man, they've taken the humanity out of this whole thing. It's no longer a matter of doing something because you believe in world peace and protect peace, but it's because you hate Charlie. And it's just starting to really get under my nerves. But what really got under my skin was one day, one of our GIs, who was in the first platoon, named Jawowski. Now, Jawowski somehow, some way, had slipped through the physical because the man was obviously slow, and if I may use the word, in those days they called it retarded. I guess today they would call it perhaps a form of autism or something like that, but he drooled and he had problems with his thinking was extremely slow, and he kind of stood there like this, and the drill sergeant, the head drill sergeant, who was quite cruel, came up and stood in front of him and said, "Hey, Jarowski, stand at attention. You're kind of slow, aren't you? Matter of fact, I'd say you're beyond slow. You're stupid." Jarowski stood there. You could see that his eyes were sad. I was next to him because of my job as a platoon leader. I was able to see this up close. Looking at him, looking at Jarowski, I'm going, this man doesn't have to be saying this. But then he took it a step further. He says, "You know, Jarowski, you're not just stupid, you're real stupid. I mean, what was your mama doing? Who was she doing it with?" And he started using the F word, and I was like livid. And I didn't say anything at that point. But he says, "Jarowski, you know, I think we ought to low crawl you." Now, low crawling was the most degrading thing you could do in the Army. It was like what you did to people when you really thought they were slimy. So he says, "I want you to low crawl. So when you get down, you have to crawl like a reptile on your belly." He says, "I want you to low crawl through the barracks from the front to the back," because they were up on these blocks into South Carolina with all these sand fleas, and there were boards under the barracks because they were on blocks and there was nothing under there. And who knows what was under there? Certainly tons of sand fleas and probably a few snakes, I would imagine. It would be in as hot. We're talking August in South Carolina, and a lot of spiders for sure. So he told Jarowski to get down. Jarowski was shaky. You get down, he said, "Come on, Jarowski, you get down there." He says, "All the rest of you, get on the other side. We'll wait for him on the other side." So we all went around to the other side of the barracks, and I'm really angry now. I'm starting to get really mad at this man, and I'm thinking to myself, I've got to say something. This is wrong. This is just plain out wrong. Poor Jarowski, I felt so bad for him. And we're waiting for him. It's a long time, and we're noticing nothing's moving. And Jarowski now is getting very close to the middle, and he's stalled underneath. Can't move. We're waiting a long time. Well, they sent somebody in after Jarowski, and they pulled him out. And when they did, he was having a nervous breakdown. He was just shaking all over, shaking wildly. I was so hurt. I turned to the drill sergeant and I said, "You cruel man." He said, "Shut up." They had to call an ambulance. Jarowski was just flopping around. I said, "You're a cruel, terrible man. You have hurt this boy. We don't know what's going to happen." He said, "Shut up." I said, "No, I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to stand up to you." He said, "I'll have you busted and you'll be in the brig." And I said, "I don't care. You can put me in the brig, but I'll tell you one thing. I'll speak my truth about what happened today, and you'll pay for it too. I guarantee you." Well, he let me go because he knew I was right. I'll tell you what, things were not good between him and me anymore. It was 10 weeks of basic training, and it was coming to an end. I was starting to do pretty well. I was starting to get used to this Army thing, and my men loved me, and we were having a good time. It was the day for us to get our orders. And I remember the drill sergeant saying a couple weeks before that, he had said, "Favreau, you're going to Vietnam. I've seen your orders." He says, "And I hope you come back in a body bag." I can't tell you what was going through my mind at that moment, but it wasn't fear. Don't want to go there. But it built up in me, and that's the point. It can build up. When people hate you day after day after day after day, it can build up. I know that. I've experienced it. And I know some of you listening to me right now are experiencing the same thing or have experienced the same thing. And I can tell you that there is a silver lining on the cloud. God will not leave you alone. God will protect you if you give your heart and your belief to Him and allow Him to have control over your life. I would highly, highly encourage that. But the day did come. The day did come for the orders. And they gave out all the orders. And I was the only person left. I says, well, where are my orders? And he goes, I've seen them. You're going to Vietnam. I said, well, where are the orders? He said, go in the barracks. Wait there till your orders arrive. I think, what? So I went in the barracks, sat there all day till it was time for supper. I'm the only one in the barracks. Everybody's gone. I go to chow. I come back. Lights out. I get up the next day. I go to chow. I come back. I sit in the barracks. I go to chow. I come back. I sit in the barracks. This goes on day after day, after day, after day, after day. 8 days later, somebody comes to the barracks. I'd been alone in here day and night for 7 days. Now 8 days later, somebody comes in and says, your orders have arrived. I looked at him and he says, you're going to be in AIT training on Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and you're going to be a personnel specialist. Back. Next thing I know, I'm in AIT training, and I'm studying typing and all of the different things that you do. And one of the things my job included as a personnel specialist was to handle classified documents. And we handled classified and top secret, and our job was to basically take those and file them. My job was also going to be to take people in from the forts, out from the forts, and it was a fairly high position for a person of my rank. And I was looking forward to it. I learned it, and I met some really nice people while I was in advanced individual training, that's AIT. And as a personnel specialist, I was looking forward, and now I was waiting for my assignment. Well, here I am, a graduated personnel specialist, waiting for my assignment, and it comes. And it's Fairbanks, Alaska, Fort Wainwright. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to Alaska. That's going to be exciting. I'm going to get a chance to experience something I've never experienced before. I had been to most of the 50 states, but I had not been to Alaska. Now I was going to be living in Alaska. They said, well, you got two ways that you can go. You can either fly up or you can drive up. If you drive up, they'll pay you for the cost of you driving up, and you'll get paid per, extra pay for the trip and everything. He says, or you can fly up, either way. I thought, well, I know how I'm going. I'm going to drive up. I'm going to get a chance to see British Columbia. I'll see the Yukon and parts of Alberta. Well, I'm in, man. So we took off. I got in my little Datsun. I went out and bought a little Datsun, a brand new one. It was a 610. This is now early 1973. And when I finally start leaving to go up to Alaska, it's March. Almost April. One of my favorite stops on the trip going up to Alaska was stopping at the Geneseo, Illinois. And they had this motel that was a deck of cards. And one wing, they had 4 wings to the motel. And one wing was hearts, another one spades, diamonds, and so on. And it was so cute. I mean, what a wonderful thing to experience. So you look at one door and it's the king of diamonds. Another one is the jack of spades. And, that's your room. Your king has the jack of spades on it. After leaving Illinois, by the end of the next day, we were winding down the hill into Cody, Wyoming, where we stayed at the Irma Hotel and had breakfast. Beautiful, beautiful cherry wood bar built by Buffalo Bill years and years ago. And what a wonderful, oh my gosh, that was just unbelievably fantastic. Then we headed up into Montana, went past where Lewis and Clark had overlooked the, on the other side of the Great Divide, made a trip on up past Glacier. So we winded up into Alberta, stayed at another motel. Calgary was fantastic. But then it really started getting exciting when we hit the gravel road, because then we found ourselves, see, they hadn't paved the road from that point on all the way up to Alaska. And sometimes you'd find boulders in the road that big, and you'd have to go around the boulders, or there'd be potholes really deep, and you had to be really careful, sometimes going under 15 miles an hour or coming almost to a stop. Other times the road was better. But for the first few hundred miles on that Alaska highway, it was just nothing but boulders and just very, very slow travel. But it was exciting. It was a lot of fun. And as we go into British Columbia and eventually into the Yukon, we're going by all these little towns that were nothing but short stops that had people who lived there that were extremely resourceful. And the impression that it made of people living this far out in the country in the cold and surviving and enjoying their lives, to me, represented a sense of how a person can be content on their many different types of environments if they learn to adapt and if they learn how to get along with each other. And that's always been very, very important to me, is to try to be one of those persons where you can get along with people. It makes so much difference. But one of the greatest things that happened on the whole trip to Alaska was coming down a slope one time in the deep mountains and seeing this herd of wild horses, all different colors, just galloping full speed along the sides of the plain and the mountain. As the mountain sloped down, you could see the horses just prancing and running. Oh, it was phenomenal. Something I'll never forget, because it was in the middle of nowhere. One thing you had to be careful about was running out of gasoline, because you might go 200 miles without seeing a single gas station. So you had to carry an extra can, 5-gallon can at least, of some extra gasoline in case you did run out. Unfortunately, as I was coming down the slope of the mountain, I wasn't able to make one of the curves because the car wouldn't take the curve. We didn't have snow tires on it. And it spun and went into the bank, brand new car, turned up. Thank goodness it didn't go over the other side and fall to our deaths, but it turned up and it crushed the whole right side of the car. I was devastated, but got over it pretty quickly. So finally we see the Alaska border. And immediately you get this feeling of you're now in the largest state by large of the United States of America, and boy is it beautiful. It's wide open. And as you're traveling up towards Tok, on the left you can see the Wrangell Mountains. They look like these vanilla ice cream with blueberries coming on top of them as they dribble on the side of the mountain. And the colors are so brilliant and so bright, and you could see for hundreds of miles clear. So we headed on up, and sure enough, late in the afternoon we arrived at Fort Wainwright, pulled over to the side of the road, parked the car. Well, of course, as soon as I got into Alaska, I wanted to start getting my workouts in. So I went to the University of Alaska, got my workout in, went back home, and soon thereafter, as a single man, I wanted to also visit downtown because I like to hang out and have fun in the bars. And I did. And it was welcome potheads, lumberjacks, and people who have money. And there was a lot of money floating around in Fairbanks in that day because they were starting to build the Alaska pipeline. And that's one of the reasons we were there as GI troops, is because that was a very costly investment, and they didn't want any havoc breaking out. And there were very few policemen in Alaska at that time. I mean, I think I only saw one the whole time I was there in years. And the whole state would be lucky to say that it had 10 policemen in the whole state. That may be an exaggeration, but not too far off. So I mentioned the potheads because on base, there wasn't much to do. And one of the things the GIs like to do is to slip out and smoke a little weed now and then. You know, they'd like to relax, enjoy themselves. You didn't have much duty up there anyway. There was nothing to do, really. Everybody had a job that was functional only to keep the GI and the forts open and happening, and the PX operating and everything, because we were there basically as a Arctic infantry team to support parachuting and the other things that take place in the Arctic mountains in case there was an invasion of that part of the United States. And my job eventually became to train those troops. There's a long story that took place with how I got to that position, however. So I'm doing my job as a personnel specialist. I'm checking troops in, I'm checking them out. I'm liking these guys when I meet them. It gives me a chance to set up a little relationship with them, make them feel comfortable, make sure their records are straight and everything's happening good for them. When they check out, I'd clear their records for them when they went to another fort, or if they were ending their time in service, I'd take care of that for them. That was my job, to keep their records up to date with all of the awards that they got, etc. One day I get called into the office, and the warrant officer says, "Favreau?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "What is this there? You haven't filled out this record of these boys that got busted for smoking pot outside the building." And I said, "No, sir." I said, "I understand that." He says, "Well, why didn't you record this?" I said, "I couldn't do it in good conscience, sir." He says, "What are you talking about?" I says, "Well, these guys are only making $288 a month, and they're getting several months' pay taken away from them from getting caught of smoking a joint outside the door." I said, "That is pretty severe. They're already giving up their lives for hardly anything, living in the cold up here, and they're doing what everybody else is doing here and all around the world on their off time, and they're going to get busted for 3 months' pay, $288, have their pay taken away from them, and the other penalties that are on here, I can't do that in good conscience. These are my peers." He says, "Favreau, it's not you to make that decision. Your job is to follow your orders." I said, "I can't do it. I can't do it." He says, "You do it, or you go back to your desk and clear it out, and you'll be busted." He comes back out there. He says, "Well, have you done it?" I said, "No, sir, I haven't." He said, "Well, clear out your desk." I said, "Okay." So a couple of days later, I get called into the captain's office, because in the barracks, you have a captain that's in charge of you. And of course, that's basically the dispatch that puts you out to the other jobs. And so the warrant officer, of course, sent orders over that I had been kicked out of my job, and now I needed to have a job. And it was up to the captain from my home barracks to find a job for me. So I find myself in front of my captain at the barracks, and he tells me that I'm a loser. I said, "No, sir, I'm not a loser." He says, "Yes, you are. You're a loser." I said, "No, sir." He says, "Shut up." I said, "Well, sir, may I talk to you off the record?" He goes, "Yeah, go ahead and talk to me off the record." I said, "Well, sir, I'm not a loser." I said, "You understand, you're a college man. You went to Louisiana State. You did what you had to do. You did what you wanted to do." I said, "I have my way of thinking. I know that there's consequences for that. And you can bust me in rank if you want to, which you just have." I says, "But you don't have the right to call me a loser." He said, "Well, you are a loser." I said, "No, I'm not a loser." He says, "Well, how could you be a winner?" I said, "Well, for one thing," I says, "I've won the Southeast United States weightlifting title 4 years in a row. I've coached the University of Florida team to ranking in the nation I'm not a loser. He says, oh, people like you are a dime a dozen. I said, sir, if they're a dime a dozen, go and find the man who can do what I can do. If you can't, then you're wrong. He says, shut up. I said, well, I thought I was off the record. He says, well, you're not off the record anymore. He says, and you're going to be starting to clean the latrines starting today. That's your job, cleaning the latrines. So I'm thinking to myself, well, okay. So next day I'm out there cleaning the latrines, and I start realizing that there's some good echo taking place in the latrines. My gosh, I've always enjoyed singing. So I started singing songs and whistling and cleaning the toilets, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is fantastic. I'm all by myself. Nobody's bothering me. I've got the windows open. Don't have to breathe any fumes, and I'm here having a good time. So he comes in to use the John. Captain comes in and he goes, Favreau, stop that whistling. I stopped that whistling. A couple of days later, he comes in, I'm whistling again. He goes, stop that whistling. I says, sir, where in the orders does it say I can't whistle? He goes, you know what? I don't like you. Come into my office. So he comes in the office and he goes, Favreau, you're not going to be cleaning the latrines anymore. I'm sending you over to the wood shop where there's a ceramic shop, and your job is going to be to teach people ceramics. So I'm going, oh, really? Well, who would I be teaching ceramics? It's mainly NCOs' wives and officers' wives. They show up. Those are the people who like to do that type of stuff. But you're going to be there every day, and that's what you're going to do. And I left there going, oh, hurt me, send me off with the wives to teach them how to do ceramics. So teaching ceramics was a lot of fun. I didn't spend a lot of time in the wood shop, but I spent a lot of time in the ceramics, and I learned to do a pretty good job and enjoyed meeting the people who I worked with over there. A lot of nice ladies came in, good friendship, good people, and I really enjoyed it. But then what I'd do at night, because I had extra time on my hands, I would go out to the airport. I got a job working for Pan American, and when the flight would come in from Tokyo to take their refueling and to get ready to go to New York, I would get the mail out of the bottom of the plane and the baggage out of there and load it up and get it all loaded up onto the carts so that the people could then leave. And I'd put the other baggage in, change the headrest on the plane, and the plane would take off, and I'd get paid so much for doing that. I'd do that usually once a night, sometimes a couple times a night, because I didn't have to be to work till later in the day anyways. It didn't matter to me. It didn't have anything to do, and I enjoyed it. Then one day, I get called into the captain's office again. I'm going, oh, what's this one about? He goes, Favreau, sit down. Okay, I sit down. He goes, read that. I pick up the letter and I go, wow, it says, you are hereby awarded 4 days on duty time to lift weights and to practice for your competitions. The other 4 hours will be your duty time, totaling up to a total of 8 hours a day. Signed, General Hedick. I'm going, my gosh. So this is signed by a brigadier general, you know. It's fantastic. I remember having met him on a hop one time when I was traveling to get to another location. He was sitting next to me, and we got into a conversation. He asked me what I did, and I told him what I was doing in the Army. He says, well, what's your background? I told him I was coach at University of Florida, and I had trained a team. And he says, well, send me some of your clippings. Send them to me, and let me take a look at them. So I did. I had put a package together. This had been months and months ago, way back when I was in South Carolina, and I had sent these things out. And so what I did is I put together my clippings and the reports and the newspaper articles about me and my lifting and the things that happened at the University of Florida with the photographs, and because we were quite a team, we were well publicized. And he had followed up on that and was now awarding me 4 hours a day to train in the gym. And I looked at it, I said, this is fantastic, sir. So the captain turns to me and says, so, When you're done your day's work, after you finish your 8 hours of work at the ceramic shop, you'll go to the gym and get the 4 hours in of the training. But sir, what it says here is that of my 8 hours of duty time, 4 of those are going to be training time, and that I will be 4 hours doing my army work and then 4 hours doing my lifting. And he goes, well, I don't care what it says. You're going to put in 8 hours for me, and then you can go put your 4 hours in. I said, excuse me, sir, but could I see the letter just one more moment? I take the letter and I go, sir, you're a captain, and this is signed by a brigadier general. Takes the papers and he throws them at me. He says, get out of here. You go to the gym and you report to Stoddard, to First Sergeant Stoddard, and I don't want to ever see your face here again. I was Brer Rabbit. Hurt me, baby. I mean, I felt like Brer Rabbit. So eventually the training was going so well that the first sergeant called me and he says, Favreau, we're giving you your own gym. Well, I'll tell you what, we had some great times. We formed a great volleyball team. We had all of the kids coming in training during the daytime. I got started building the weightlifting team. We became undefeated as a weightlifting team. And the fun we had after hours there, as I'd bring in people from Fairbanks and so on, was just incredible. It turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful experience. But it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't hung in there and stood up for what I believed in and held my truth and the things that I really thought were important. So training was going well, and people were having a good time, and I was getting fit, very fit. And I went downtown one night, and I was on 2nd Street, and I went into the elbow room. And when I walked into the elbow room, Priscilla was sitting on the bar stool with this big guy, must have been about 6'5". And she turned and saw me when she came in. She goes, hi, Bob. She was all excited because she really liked me a lot. We were close friends, and she just got really excited when she had an opportunity to be with me. So I was going, great, Priscilla, it's good to see you. And so I'm on my way just to go around the bar, and she goes, it's sure good to see you, Bob. I go, it's good to see you too, Priscilla. And all of a sudden, the guy that she's sitting with goes, GI. And I stop. And I don't say anything. He goes, GI, I'm talking to you. I went, oh, got some trouble. And in Alaska, there's this strange thing where you don't ever insult somebody. If you do, it's going to result in fist and cuff. It may not be fair and it might not be right, but that's the way it was in those days. And that's the way most of the men reacted. So I knew I was in for some trouble. I knew there was going to be something happening here, one way or the other. So I stopped. And he says, what are you, in special forces? Well, I was in special services, and I was thinking special services. And I says, yeah, that's right. And he stands up. He's real big. I'm looking at him, going, oh my gosh, wow, not good. I'm thinking, you better figure this one out. So he starts to taunt me. He goes, I don't think you're crap. I could take you like that. I could take you down. Okay, so I'm thinking, okay, you're going to need some strategy. And I noticed he was standing in front of the bar stool. And I was about so close. And I was just ignoring what he was saying. I just stopped talking at that point. And I thought, but if he touches me, I'm going to act like I'm doing nothing. But as soon as he touches me, because he's standing there in front of the bar stool, I'm going to use my strength and my speed, and I'm going to immediately go down on my legs, come up with a push on his chest, push him up and over the bar stool, have him trip over the bar stool and onto his back, and I'll take it from there. So he goes, that's a pretty silly pom-pom on your head there. And he goes, well, that's a real silly pom-pom. And when he touched it, I did exactly what I had planned to do. And a few minutes later, I walked out of that bar, and he remained there on the ground. So I was pretty upset that somebody, a stranger who didn't even know me, would pick a fight just like that, knowing he was way larger than me, really had the advantage, and that he would do it just because he thought he could. And I had experienced that as a young child with the older boys who would sometimes beat me up when I'd get off the bus just because they knew they could. And I thought, boy, this is just a terrible way for people to be. And so I was downtown again, not too long thereafter, about a week later. I'm thinking, well, thank goodness he had a chance to learn his lesson, and maybe some good came out of this whole thing. And I'm walking along, and I cross him. He's walking down the sidewalk, and he looks at me, and he gives me an evil eye like this. And I'm thinking, he's not done. Whoa! I'm in the China bar one night, and I'm sitting there having a beer with my friend John and my friend Paul. And I look over and I see Slim sitting in a booth with a woman right in front of the bathrooms. So there's a booth there, and he's sitting there laughing and sitting next to this beautiful lady. And I'm thinking, okay, guys, I'm going over there, and I'm going to finish this. And I don't want you to interfere unless it comes to the point where I'm going to get hurt real bad, pull them off me. That's all. They agreed to it. Well, I acted like I was going to the restroom, and we finished it off. It was a fast, furious fight. And this time Slim got hurt real bad. They had to hospitalize him. I went out the back door. I left. I came back. The lady that he was with was sitting at the bar. I went and sat down next to her. And as I'm sitting there, she was really liking me. And I realized that the people in the bar were really liking me. I'm thinking, I had heard that the ambulance had taken him away. He was in the hospital. I'm really confused here because I'm feeling really bad. I'm thinking all of a sudden, I'm a hero. Well, the word spread because Slim had a reputation of picking fights with people, beating them bad, hurting them. Somehow, by the grace of God, I had won 2 fights. And now I don't think Slim was ever going to bother me again. In fact, he never did. But he came in, and the word spread that the police came to visit him to find out what had happened in the hospital, and he told them to get lost. And that really gave Slim some points in my mind. I thought, the man didn't report me. The man kept me out of jail. And I was grateful for that. And he kind of liked me at that point, but he still wanted me to get hurt, but he admired me because he knew he was in the wrong, and he had picked a fight for no reason with a guy who had no intention of ever hurting anybody. But what he would do, from time to time when people would come in, he'd pick the biggest guy and he'd say, hey, you think you're pretty tough? And they'd form a little friendship. He says, well, I'll tell you who the meanest guy in this bar is. It's the bouncer right over there. Because you see, when they found out that I knew how to handle myself, they asked me if I would work for the bar, and I became the bouncer in the biggest bar in town. It had the natives coming in. It did a lot of business. It was always packed. The people would come in off of the slope, these lumberjack guys. They'd ring the bell because they had thousands of dollars in their pocket. They'd buy the whole bar, and people would get crazy drunk sometimes, and the fights would break out, and they'd throw cue balls, and they'd hit people over the head with bar stools, and it would break out, and I'd be in the middle of it trying to break it up, and one thing happened to the next, and somehow, some way, I would manage to win all of the fights. And it wasn't that I was that tough a guy. God was just protecting me. I was in the bar one night, doing my job, sitting at the door, making sure no trouble happened. A man came in with his son, and the son was a well-built guy, and the father came in with him, and they got in and had a beer, and somebody caused some problem in the bar, and they saw me take the guy out. The guy had given me some trouble, and I got him out of the bar. And the man came up to me, he says, "My son here is the boxing champion of his class in Montana. He could rip you apart." I'm thinking, well, just enjoy yourself, have some drinks, and don't worry about that. So because I don't have any intention of causing any problem with anybody in here, my job is to make sure no problems happen. He looks at me and gave me a dirty look. I'm thinking, oh man, what is it with people? So night goes on, I have to use the restroom. I go in the restroom, I'm at the John. Boom, the door pops open. It's his son. The guy comes up to me, starts hitting me in the back of my head. I thought to myself, I've got to let it all go. I've got to let it loose. I've got to come out of here alive. So I did. I was very fortunate. And I dragged him out of the room by his feet. I dragged him right through the bar, kicked open the front door, put him out the door. His dad looked at me, went outside. Went down the road a little bit for a moment. Went inside the Savoy to get away from the China. Went to the mirror in the bathroom over there. Finished using the bathroom. Looked in the mirror and saw my face, and I said, God, what's happened to me? What have I become? What's happened to me? Help me. Help me. Please help. It was now well into the winter of 1974, January or February. It was really cold, and the man was staring at me. Sitting on that stool staring at me, didn't take off his eyes off me for 6 hours. It was creepy because he didn't move at all. His eyes didn't even blink, just staring at me with hate in his eyes. And then, after 6 hours, he lifted his finger and he went like this. And I went over to him, and he goes like this. What's your name? I said, Bob. He said, well, Bobby boy, I don't like you. I don't like white people. We've come up from Wounded Knee. And any white man who is in charge of Native Americans will be eliminated. he opened up a sheet of paper. You see this list right here, Bobby boy? Look at these 14 names. Look at them closely. Number 15, Bob. Doorman. Gina Bar. Bobby boy, you're on the list. Take a look at the first two names.